Super excited to talk to you today about why messaging loves intents. My name is Nam. I'm one of the co-founders. Oh, there you go. I'm one of the co-founders of Hyperlane. And yeah, I'm here to tell you why messaging loves intents. So here's my agenda. One, we're going to talk about this kind of possibly famous intents versus messaging debate. Two, we're going to talk about why intents need modularity. And then three, just the general concept of like, let's not duplicate each other's work, let's collaborate. All right, so if you've been following intents, especially on crypto Twitter, you've probably seen this debate, right? Like, oh, intents, oh, messaging, one is better than the other one sucks. I think there's, some of these tweets that you can check out here, like some of these folks actually gave talks earlier. And yeah, like you could probably imagine like, oh shit, I have to choose one over the other. Well, I'm here to tell you that it doesn't have to be this way, right? Like, I'm generally not the kind of kumbaya person, but like on this specific topic, I think it's totally wild that we have this debate. And so I'm here to tell you why. One thing that we can see is that intents are like increasing in volume, right? Like basically, I guess most of 23, most volume was ultimately kind of being done by like message-based bridges and like, some people think of Hyperlane primarily as a message interrupt protocol. But then in 24, we've seen kind of the rise of like intent-based bridging. And so let's talk about why, right? Like we're here at Abstract. Most of us hopefully know what intents are, but like, let me just give you the kind of very basic spiel. Like the user has basically like, oh, I have 100 USDC on base and I want 100 USDC on optimism. What they do is basically create this order. The order gets initiated on the settlement contract. Once it lands in the settlement contract, right, like anybody can observe this, any filler can observe this, and basically decide to give the user those 100 USDC on optimism. And then on the origin chain, the filler basically gets repaid, right? And so the user experience is kind of nice because the user just says what they want, and then it's somebody else's job, the filler in this case, to do the job. This diagram is from, I believe, Uniswap's tweet, right? Like Uniswap and Across are both working on this like ERC 7683, which is basically trying to standardize this basic cross-chain flow, right? And so this has basically been the debate of like, oh, this is so much better than message-based bridging. And right, like Hart sometimes says like, oh, messaging becomes irrelevant. But like here I'm trying to tell you like intents need messaging, right? Like how does a filler know that like if they fill the user on the destination chain, that they actually get back the funds on the origin chain, right? That's fundamentally basically the cross-chain interrupt problem, the same problem that like message-based interrupt is kind of trying to solve. And so it really makes absolutely no sense for me for why we say messages versus intents, right? Like they need to be best friends. Like you cannot build an intent protocol without messaging. And so this is going to be the basis of my talk, right? The idea is that like, look, like if you build an intent protocol today, like some people have, like you need settlement. You need this idea of like users and fillers agreeing that like something happened on the destination chain for you to release the origin chain funds, right? Like if you use bad settlement, a user could deposit their funds on the origin chain and then just like lose them, even though nobody actually did the thing on the destination chain. And in the same way, in reverse, if I'm a filler and I fill a user on the destination chain, but basically the settlement is bad, I may never get the origin chain tokens. And so my suggestion here is basically like, look, if you're an intent protocol, you don't want to reinvent the whole wheel, right? Like what we've done as Hyperlane is built this like modular verification mechanism, what we call ISMs. And so you can basically use, right, like in the base case, you can use a multisig, but we are also having like these different ISMs with like optimistic, economics, EK-like clients, roll-up bridges. And so just depending on the two chains that you're trying to connect for this like intent route, like there's just different trade-offs available when it comes to the settlement, right? Like basically for like a $10 intent, who cares, right? Like just do a multisig. But like if you want to fill $1 million intent, like you probably don't want to just trust this to like two entities. And so the pitch, like I said, for intent protocol is like, you don't want to have to deal with this, right? Like let the message bridge basically figure out the hard parts of like, how do you know that destination chain state happened? And you can focus on the things that like I think intents are great for, right? The UX for users and solvers, solver integrations, right? Like right now, there's not enough solvers in the market, and it's just like annoying for all these solvers to have to do integrations. And probably most importantly, where they will see the most benefit is basically for intent and solver matching, right? Like right now, a lot of intents are very simple. They have like fixed fees. Maybe there's like an RFQ, and basically decentralizing that and making it more accessible to solvers is way more important. For solvers, like they get intent, like integration simplification, right? Like people are launching intent protocols left and right, and it's actually like very difficult for a solver to integrate all of these different intent protocols. And what they would rather do is focus on like rebalancing, inventory management, right? Like indexing and TX inclusion. And if you do this modularity well, right, like applications get, again, integration simplification, right? Like right now, as an application, I have to decide like what intent protocol do I support? Even though each intent protocol, all they're really just doing differently is settlement. And I want to focus on the UX for my users, right? And ultimately for users, if we not have all these intent protocols rebuild the same thing, like you will ultimately get better quotes, right? Because people get work on competition and they can focus on getting value. So this is kind of the like flywheel that I'm hoping to see, right? Is that like better UX leads to actually more volume on these intent bridging, and then more volume ultimately means more competition on the solver side, which again is better UX for everybody involved. And you can kind of see this on the cross side. I think this is a fees kind of development on a cross, right? Like as competition basically like increases, like fees plummet down, and that's great for users. So two examples that I want to kind of showcase here are basically like intent protocols have realized, hey, I don't want to build settlement again. I'll start with Skip, right? So Skip is a aggregator primarily on the Cosmos side, and they've noticed that like to go from Ethereum to Osmosis right now, right? Like yes, it's great that there's CCTP for Noble, and then you can IBC to Osmosis, but they have to wait for finality on the Ethereum side, right? It takes a couple minutes. Like this is a typical screen, right? Like you wait there for 17 minutes because you have to like do USDC over to Noble and then swap on Osmosis. What they've built is basically Skip Go Fast, right? Like they basically have a solver who fronts the capital on, let's say, Osmosis, Celestia in this case, and they know that they will get repaid on Ethereum later. So this is kind of the like, this is kind of the like diagram that they do now. And so as a user, I get a way better experience, right? Like I get basically my tokens in Cosmos within seconds. And as a filler, like you get like a small fee to doing so, but like you're basically taking very little risk because all you have to do is make sure that the fill actually happened on Ethereum. Another example is Econ Bend. So Bend is a account abstracted wallet. Well, it's not only account abstracted wallet, but it's also chain abstracted wallet, right? So basically you as Alice, let's say you have like $1 on base, you have like $2 on optimism, might not even be, right, like USDC, it could be USDT, right? Like they have a very nice kind of like product experience where all you really see in your wallet is dollars. And those dollars could be on any chain pretty much. And so let's say you want to say like, hey, I want to send Bob $3 on base. And so what you can do in their kind of like intent protocol that they've built on top of Hyperlane is basically just create a single kind of like user interaction which signs these user intents to give Bob those $3. And here is a demo that I guess I should do a second video. Yes. Right, so here on the left, I'm Alice, I have $3, I have $2 in optimism, $1 in base. I can just send the user, like my target user, some money. I specify like, oh, I want it to be on base in USDC. I click send. No MetaMask, no anything. That's the beauty of account abstraction. And then bam, on Bob's side, they just receive $3, right? So like, no more figuring out like, oh, which bridge UI do I have to use, like which route and aggregator, whatever. Like you just get $3 on USDC, and the filler who did this job ultimately gets the $2 on optimism and the $1 on base through Hyperlane settlement. If you can go back. Right? And so those are to us like two great examples of projects that have decided to like, hey, I want to build this intent-based product experience, but I do not want to reinvent settlement. And so basically what we found is that that's ultimately a powerful experience, right? But there's way more things that like have to be done to build a useful intent protocol, right? Like you have to build solvers, you have to build intent and solver matching. Those solvers have to rebalance. there's a lot of interesting kind of like mechanisms for like, oh, do solvers have active capital? Do they use passive capital? And so we believe in this like future where like people, instead of competing on building like these competitive intent protocols, they actually work together on this like open intent framework, right? Because there's this intent UX mechanism is ultimately super powerful to create better user experiences for users. And what's been stopping us is just like, oh shit, I have to build the whole thing myself. And so we are super excited to like basically like start this effort with a bunch of parties. And the first thing that we've done is basically build this like modular reference solver that can basically solve for different protocols at the same time. And so if you can move on the next video. So basically this solver currently is implemented to both solve for a reference 7683 implementation, the standard that both a Uniswap and a Cross launched, but can also solve for ecos like Hyperlane routes that we've just shown earlier, right? So basically like here you run the solver. On the bottom screens, you see orders being like intents being created on those two different intent protocols. And then hopefully if all goes well, you can basically see that the solver kind of like is indexing those two intent protocols and filling those easily, right? And so the idea is that like, hey, if you build a new intent protocol, like you don't have to build a solver again, right? Like all you have to do is like build the like intent protocol module for the solver. And what you will get out of for free is basically the indexing, the TX logic, like determining whether an intent is profitable for you or not, and like the rebalancing. And so if you can go back, so the idea for us is basically like, hey, like our ultimate goal is to get this intent experience to every chain out there. Like if you go next slide, I can go next slide. To us, right, like Hyperlane has been focused on what we call permissionless interoperability. Like if you launch a new chain, like you should not have to beg like the kind of like permissioned like incumbents of interop to support your chain. Like we just fundamentally that's not like aligned with our ecosystem, with our like the values of our ecosystem. And so we think that same thing applies to intents, right? Like if you want this intent experience, you should not be kind of gatekept out of that experience. Like you should be able to have an open framework that allows you to deploy this experience to your user base. And so, like, I think of this a lot, like, or like, to, I guess, close out, like, I think of a lot as this, like, right, like, if you want to go from A to B, you could look up at Google Maps and follow the directions, and that's basically, right, like, a very descriptive way of getting there. Or you can just, like, plug in your destination to Uber and, like, let the solver, in this case, Uber driver, get you there, right? And so that's ultimately a way better user experience. And we think everybody in crypto deserves it, whether you are on OP and Base or whether you are on your own rollup. So this is to say, messaging loves intents. We think everybody loves each other. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you, everybody. And hope you have a good day.